How many fishing hacks have you tried that actually stuck past the first trip? Most sound clever in a video and fall apart the second you're on the bank with wet hands and a tangled rig. I picked up these 20 from dock workers, retired guides, and old-timers who never filmed a thing. Not one requires a trip to the tackle shop. There's one idea running through all 20 that changed how I think about fishing. The best hacks aren't about adding something new. They're about removing friction. Every minute you spend fumbling with gear or digging through a box is a minute your bait isn't in the water. And the only thing that catches fish is time in the water. The last one on this list, a 2-second cooking spray trick, saved more of my rigs from rust over 3 seasons than any product I found at the tackle shop. Stay for that one. Take a thick rubber band, the kind that comes wrapped around broccoli at the grocery store, and loop it around your rod and reel. Wrap it once around the rod blank just above the reel seat, stretch it up and hook it under the first guide. It holds your hook snug against the rod and keeps the line from unspooling. What used to be a loose, floppy mess becomes something you carry in one hand without anything swinging or snagging. I started doing this after a morning on Lake Livingston where I set my rod against the tailgate, turned around to grab my cooler, and the hook caught on the bed liner. Yanked it free without thinking and ripped the eyelet clean off a brand new ugly stick. A rubber band would have prevented all of it. You've probably thrown away 50 of them this year. Grab one next time. 3 seconds of effort and your rod travels like it's in a case. Works on spinning rods, bait casters, anything with a guide ring. That kind of wasted time adds up faster than you think. Clip a small nail clipper to a retractable lanyard and pin it to your vest or belt loop. You'll cut line faster than scissors, faster than your teeth, and you can do it one-handed while the other hand holds the rod. I went through an entire season using my teeth to bite monofilament before a guy at Lake Barkley looked at me like I'd lost my mind and handed me a dollar store clipper. Changed everything. One hand, clean cut, every time. The retractable cord snaps it back to your chest so you never lose it. And unlike scissors, it works fine with wet hands. If you fish with braided line, keep a separate pair because braid will dull the blade faster. For small tackle, a weekly pill organizer. 7 compartments, snap lid. About the size of a ketchup packet laid end to end. Split shot in Monday, swivels in Tuesday, small hooks in Wednesday. Holds more than a $15 compartment tray. I'm not saying the pill organizer is better. I'm saying it costs $1 and does the same job. Take a plain candle, the cheap white kind, and rub wax on the threads of your reel seat. That's where the reel foot screws into the rod. The wax prevents corrosion and stops the seat from seizing up in cold weather. Takes 2 seconds. Saves you from that moment where you're standing at the truck twisting your reel and the whole thing is locked solid. Saltwater guys already know this trick. Freshwater guys usually learn it the hard way, standing in a parking lot in December trying not to snap a graphite rod blank. One candle lasts years. Your sliding bobber is drifting up and down the line every cast, and your depth is never where you set it. Stick a short piece of a wooden toothpick into the peg hole on the bobber, that little slot where the line threads through the top. About a 1/4 inch, roughly the size of a corn kernel. Snap it off flush with the surface. 3 seconds and your bobber locks in place exactly where you want it. This matters more than most people realize. If you're fishing crappie or bluegill suspended at a specific depth and your bobber slides 2 feet every cast, you're presenting at a different depth every time. Consistency is what turns an occasional bite into a steady pattern. I keep a few toothpicks in my pill organizer. Thursday's compartment. Save the twist ties from bread bags. Wrap one around the line on any spare spool that isn't on a reel. Leader material. Extra monofilament, fluorocarbon, anything with loose line. A single twist tie stops it from unraveling in your tackle box and saves you from dealing with 20 feet of tangled mess when you need to respool on the water. I keep a handful in the bottom of every bag I own. They weigh nothing, cost nothing, and they fix a problem that comes up nearly every trip if you carry spare line, which you should. You're on the bank. You thread a nightcrawler onto the hook, cast it out, and sit there for 20 minutes watching nothing happen. The guy 30 yards down is pulling in crappie every few minutes. Same worm, same rig, same water. The difference is what was on his hands before he touched the bait. Your skin carries natural oils, residue from sunscreen, gasoline if you filled up on the way, even nicotine if you smoke. Fish detect those chemicals at concentrations you can't imagine. Your skin produces a compound called L-serine, and published research from multiple universities has confirmed that game fish actively avoid it. Catfish, bass, trout, they all respond the same way. The scent doesn't attract them, it warns them off. The old-timers figured this out decades before anyone published a paper. They'd rub their hands in lake mud before touching bait. The modern version is a small jar of dry coffee grounds in your tackle box. Rub a pinch between your palms like you're washing your hands, then rinse in the lake. The grounds are abrasive enough to scrub off oils and residue, and the coffee itself leaves a neutral, earthy scent that doesn't spook anything. I tested this across a full season on Broken Bow in Oklahoma. Days when I washed first averaged about 40% more bites. Same spots, same baits, same water temperatures. The only variable was what was on my hands, 40%, from a jar that cost $1. Once your scent is clean, the next question is whether the fish holds on long enough for you to set the hook. Take your soft plastics, the rubbery worms and creature baits, and soak them overnight in a bag with non-iodized salt. Kosher salt works. About 2 tablespoons per dozen baits, roughly a pencil stub worth of salt poured into the bag. The salt draws moisture out and adds weight, which changes the fall rate so the bait sinks more naturally. But the real benefit is that fish hold on a full second or two longer before spitting it out. I used to think this was about flavor. The truth is more complicated. The salt creates a denser texture that feels more like real prey in the fish's mouth. A natural crawdad or minnow has weight and resistance when a base clamps down. An untreated soft plastic feels hollow by comparison, and the fish rejects it faster. More hold time means more time to set the hook, especially on bass and walleye that bump before they commit. 2 tablespoons of salt, 5 minutes of prep, measurably more fish on the hook. Grab one of those mesh produce bags, the kind onions come in at the grocery store. Put your minnows or shiners inside and dip the bag in the water next to you. Fresh water circulates through the mesh, keeps the bait alive, and when you need one, you just lift the bag and pick the size you want. No more chasing a minnow around a bucket with cold fingers for 30 seconds every time you need to rebait. Keeps your hands drier too, which ties back to that scent contamination issue. The less you handle live bait with bare wet hands, the less L-serine you're transferring. Leftover bait at the end of a trip is something most people throw away. Don't. Pack whatever you've got, chicken liver, cut shad, worm pieces into an ice cube tray. 1 piece per compartment. Freeze it solid, pop the cubes into a freezer bag. Next trip you've got pre-portioned bait that thaws in about 10 minutes on the bank. Catfish and panfish don't care that it was frozen. Neither do carp. The amino acids that attract fish survive freezing just fine. Looks like evidence from a crime scene documentary sitting in the freezer. My wife has opinions about it, but over the course of a season, you'll save probably $30 or $40 in bait you would have thrown away and rebought. Over 3 tournaments on Lake Livingston, I tracked garlic powder on half my casts and fished clean on the other half. The garlic side pulled more fish every single time. Bass and channel catfish both responded. Sprinkle a pinch directly onto a soft plastic before you cast. Just a light dusting, not a coating. I don't have a clean answer for why this works on baits that have no natural scent to begin with. Garlic isn't something fish encounter in the wild, but a dollar shaker from the grocery store lasts an entire season, and the results have been consistent enough that I stopped questioning it. If you're picking up useful stuff from this list, subscribe. We put out more of these every week. I'll say this as plainly as I can. A 5-cent sewing needle is the single most underrated piece of tackle you will ever own. When you thread a soft plastic worm onto a hook the usual way, pushing the hook point through the head and working it through the body, you tear the plastic. The entry hole stretches. After 2 or 3 fish, the bait is shredded and you're reaching for a new one. Over a full day of fishing, that's 4 or 5 soft plastics burned through when one would have lasted. A sewing needle fixes this entirely. Push the needle through the nose of the worm, eye end forward. Thread your line through the needle eye. Pull the needle through the entire length of the worm, and the line follows it clean. Slide the worm up the line and onto the hook. Perfectly centered, no tearing, no offset, and it lasts 3 to 4 times longer than a hand-threaded bait. This is what removing friction actually looks like. One 5-cent tool that saves you 3 or 4 baits per trip. At $3 a pack, that adds up over a season. My grandmother threaded a needle every day of her life. Took me 30 years of fishing to apply the same principle to a plastic worm. If you fish with jig heads, those weighted hooks with the round or football-shaped head, you've probably noticed your soft plastic slides down the shank after a few casts. The bait bunches up near the bend of the hook and looks terrible in the water. Slide a bobber stop onto the hook shank before you thread the plastic on. A bobber stop is a tiny rubber bead, smaller than a pea, that you can push into position with your thumbnail. Snug it up against the head and it acts like a collar that keeps the bait locked in place. 5 seconds of setup. Your presentation looks right cast after cast instead of slowly falling apart by the 3rd retrieve. I ignored this next one for about 3 years because it seemed too simple to matter. Take a pair of pliers and bend the hook point outward by about 10 degrees. That's barely visible, roughly the angle of a clock hand moving 1 minute. Just a slight outward flare away from the shank. That wider gap catches more flesh on the hook set, especially on crappie and walleye with soft mouths where the hook tends to pull free. A guide on Lake Barkley showed me this after watching me lose 3 fish in a row. I kept a log for 2 months afterward. My hookup rate on crappie went from about 6 out of 10 bites to 8 out of 10. The only change was that slight bend. Be careful with thin wire hooks. Too much angle weakens the metal and you'll straighten out on a bigger fish. 10 degrees is plenty. If the point looks visibly flared to the naked eye, you've gone too far. In cold water, below about 50 degrees where you'd want gloves on the boat, trim the skirt on your jigs. Cut it back by about 1/3, roughly ½ an inch, with scissors. Less material gives you a subtler profile and a slower fall that matches how sluggish cold water bass and trout get when their metabolism drops. They won't chase a big flared skirt in January. A trimmed jig falls quieter and sits lower, and that's what gets bit when the water is cold. Remember that rubber band at the beginning? Same philosophy here. Tiny investment, big return in time saved. Put a drop of Dawn dish soap on your rod guides and run a damp cloth through each one before your next trip. The soap clears grime, dried algae, and salt buildup, the invisible stuff that creates friction against your line during casts. Less friction means longer casts, but it also cuts the heat that forms on your guides during fast retrieves, especially if you fish crankbaits or spinner baits. That heat weakens monofilament and fluorocarbon over time. You won't feel it happening, but your line gets more brittle with every trip. A minute of cleaning before you head out adds casting distance and extends your line life. 1 bottle of Dawn lasts longer than you will. One thing I should mention, These hacks are built for normal days, the ones where fish are there but making you earn it. During a hard feeding window, right before a storm or that first warm morning in April, the fish are aggressive enough that most of this doesn't matter. Just get your bait in the water. But those windows are 1 trip out of 10. The other 9 trips are when friction starts costing you fish. Wrap a few feet of duct tape around a disposable lighter, not the whole roll, just 8 or 10 wraps around the body. Now you've got a compact repair kit that fits in any vest pocket. The tape patches wader leaks, fixes cracked rod guides temporarily, secures a loose reel foot, and wraps a handle grip that's peeling. The lighter cuts braided line clean with flame because braid frays badly when you use clippers and leaves a rough tag end that can nick your guides. 6 years in my vest pocket. I've used the tape to repair things I didn't even know could break at 6 a.m. on a bank. And that brings me to the hack that saved more trips than any spare rod I've carried. Keep a handful of small zip ties in your vest, the thin 4-inch ones about the length of your index finger. When a rod guide breaks or comes loose, and it will eventually, you wrap a zip tie around the guide foot and the rod blank, cinch it tight, snip the tail with your clipper. Not pretty, not permanent, but it holds for the rest of the day and you don't have to pack up and drive home because of one broken guide. One afternoon on Tawakoni, my top guide popped off on my second cast of the morning. A 10-cent zip tie kept me fishing for 6 more hours. I finished local tournaments with zip tie repairs on my rod and nobody knew until I told them. 5 ties in the vest. Weigh nothing. Take up no space, and the one time you need them, you'll be glad you listened. For your reel internals, dab petroleum jelly on the O-rings, those small rubber seals inside the reel body that keep water out. Just a tiny amount, about the size of a pea on your fingertip. Keeps the seals soft, prevents cracking, and your drag stays smooth through the whole season instead of getting gritty by August. Do this once in the spring and you're covered. Check your owner's manual first though. Abu Garcia reels in particular use a slightly different O-ring material that responds better to silicone-based lubricant than petroleum jelly. This last one is the hack I teased at the beginning, and it might be the most useful thing on this entire list. Take a can of regular cooking spray, the kind you'd use on a frying pan, and give your finished rigs a light mist before you store them. Hooks, swivels, snap rings, the knot itself. The oil film slows oxidation on the metal, so your hooks stay sharp and your swivels stay smooth instead of developing that gritty rust that builds up in a tackle box after a few weeks of humidity. But the second benefit is the one most people miss. The spray keeps your knots from drying out. A dried knot loses flexibility, and a stiff knot is a weak knot. Monofilament and fluorocarbon are both vulnerable to this. I ran a pull test on 20 knots, half sprayed and half stored dry, after sitting in a tackle box for 3 weeks in a garage. The sprayed knots held about 15% more breaking strength. Same line, same knots, same storage temperature. 1 can of store-brand cooking spray costs around $2 and lasts a couple of seasons at least. That works out to about a penny per trip to protect every rig in your box. A guy who ran a bait shop outside Livingston showed me that one. He said the $8 rust inhibitors on his own counter did the exact same thing as a can of PAM. He sold the inhibitors anyway, but he used PAM on his own rigs. Pick any 3 off this list. Bring them to the water this Saturday. The guy who shows up with a rubber band on his rod, coffee grounds in his vest, and a sewing needle in his tackle box doesn't look like he's got an advantage. But his bait's in the water while everyone else is still untangling theirs.